I'm Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zenner. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
The Minnesota sex offender program has been ruled unconstitutional by a federal court judge, but changes to be made to the program remain uncertain.
Has the average Minnesotan benefited from the recently completed legislative session? Business and progressive leaders join us with their views.
And we'll remember an unusual reunion of a legendary movie's most memorable characters in our news file story.
It's all coming up next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. Independence Day just a week away. Julie, summer is about to kick into high gear.
Well, it sure felt like it today. It was a beautiful day, and hopefully it'll last through the weekend.
Oh, we certainly hope so. All right, some great subjects coming up. Might as well get started.
All right. Thank you, Denny, and welcome, everyone. Last week's ruling by federal Judge Donovan Frank on the Minnesota sex offender program was not a huge surprise to most observers, but the judge's decision that the program is unconstitutional does open up a can of worms for the state. At issue is what changes should be made to the program that protects both the offender's rights and public safety. One man who will have a seat at the table on this issue is Senator Tony Lourey, a Democrat from Kerrick. And welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you coming in.
Absolutely.
Lawmakers shouldn't have been caught off guard by the decision, but it sounds like a fair number of people, including the governor, disagree with it.
Well, I mean, whether the current program is constitutional or not is what's at stake, and the governor disagrees that it is unconstitutional, which is what Judge Frank said. But I do think that regardless of the constitutionality, Minnesota would be well served to make some changes to the sex offender program and make more frequent assessments of whether people continue to meet criteria, and have some less restrictive alternatives available.
You'll be meeting with Judge Frank on August the 10th, I think it is. What will you tell him?
Well, I mean, largely I'll be trying to listen. It'll be a very large group of people meeting. And we, in the Minnesota Senate, where I serve, we've been grappling with this issue for quite a while. And we've actually passed the Senate, but it hasn't passed both bodies and it hasn't been presented to the governor, but some substantial reforms to the sex offender program to try to do some of the very things that would help create that constitutional framework and allow us to continue running the program, to provide the public safety but balance the rights of
the question remains, how can a person be locked up for something we fear he or she might do?
Well, that is the civil process, and it is a civil commitment, and the judge's ruling is that it is a fundamental liberty interest at stake. Yeah. And so they applied strict scrutiny and said that the state does have a compelling state interest in protecting public safety. But the response that the state has to that compelling state interest has to be narrowly tailored. And that's where Minnesota runs into trouble. We don't have less restrictive alternatives than our high security treatment facility in Moose Lake and St. Peter, and we need to provide some other options.
The judge was serious. He called this draconian.
There were some strong words in this opinion, absolutely, and he would like us to see. He would like to see us make some significant changes.
For those who haven't really been watching this issue very closely, we often hear about level 2, level 3 offenders who are released into communities. The public is warned about that. Who decides whether somebody should be released after they serve their sentence or whether they should be civilly committed to a place like Moose Lake or St. Peter?
Well, the ultimate decision is with the court. The county attorney, though, petitions the court for a civil commitment, and the Department of Corrections, who is releasing most of these individuals after a criminal sentence, can refer to the county attorneys for recommendation that, whether or not the individual likely meets criteria or not, and then the county attorney petitions the court, and the court makes the ultimate decision on the way in and on the way out.
Mm-hmm. So the folks who are in these facilities, would you say that they are the worst of the worst of the sexual offenders, the sexually violent offenders, the predators, those sort of folks?
By and large, the individuals that are being served at the Minnesota Sex Offender Program are the worst of the worst. Mm-hmm. But there probably is less restrictive alternatives for some of them that could very well meet the public safety aspect of this. I mean, there's a lot of frail elderly, there's a lot of developmentally disabled,
Yeah.
there's a lot of individuals who've never committed a crime as an adult, juvenile offenders who've wound up and never been through the criminal justice system at all, and have only been through the civil system, and a mounting body of evidence that things done as a juvenile aren't really very predictive of adult behavior. So a whole cohort of people that we really need to review to see if they continue to meet standards and continue to warrant this concrete and barbed wire, high secure treatment facility.
Senator, we call this a treatment center at Moose Lake. Are we arguing semantics? Is it really a prison?
No, it is a treatment facility. The individuals there do
But they're locked
receive.
up, right?
They are locked up. It is a secure treatment environment.
That is not a prison.
Well, it is not a prison. It cannot be a prison. That would
Again,
obviously cross the boundaries with the constitutional rights. I mean, these are by and large individuals who have committed heinous crimes. They've stood before a jury of their peers, and the criminal justice system received a sentence, finished that sentence, and then we have decided that we're not really quite ready to allow them to be released, and so we've spun up the civil system.
Is the answer to perhaps have longer sentences, have longer mandatory minimums, longer parole?
Well,
time out there?
Maybe longer could work. I mean, but I think an indeterminate sentence is something that used to work as well. So that if you're wrapping up your criminal sentence and it's not quite, we're not quite sure that you're cured and ready to be released, you could continue to serve in a corrections model while receiving that treatment rather than try to spin up that civil system. And that would meet constitutional muster, but continue to serve people within the corrections model rather than the civil, the human services model, but still provide that treatment.
How many people are in the treatment center, and we've released very few?
We've
Two,
unconditionally released 0 in Minnesota. We have, I think, 32 in community preparation services, which is the phase just before release, and I think we have somewhere in the ballpark of 250 in the fairly advanced stages of treatment on the St. Peter campus, and we have just over 400 individuals in the earlier phases of treatment at Moose Lake. And truthfully, the growth of the St. Peter, both the still secure but the later phases of treatment, and the community preparation services, the CPS components, have undergone tremendous growth. I mean, we have been trying to build that pipeline and move people along and actually make a determination that they're improving in their treatment and ready for some other
So
options.
with Judge Donovan Frank's decision, some of our viewers might be asking, could some people be released from that program almost immediately?
Well, Governor Dayton has indicated rather clearly that he plans to appeal this decision. So even if Judge Frank were to rule and issue the remedies portion and said that people would be released, it's likely that that would be stayed until the resolution of an appeal. So the administration believes that the program is constitutional. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't make any changes, I don't think. But that it should be at the state's discretion to make those changes and make them for reasons that actually work better for the state of Minnesota. If the courts do issue a remedies portion and they are enforceable, it's a very big hammer. They don't have the ability to really fine-tune and build a program in the same way that the legislature and the administration has the ability to really fine-tune something and debate what works. The judge, their tools are relatively limited, and it would be a fairly crude solution. We would be much better served if the legislature could actually undertake this. And again, the Minnesota Senate has, on a number of occasions, really fostered a strong bipartisan conversation and moved the ball significantly. And we hope that that this pressure from Judge Frank can help us renew that effort and try to take the next few steps and do what needs to be done without draconian interactions by the court.
Are you concerned at all about the public safety issues that could be associated with letting some of these folks go? Because there is a strong likelihood that if they are released that they will reoffend, and that then comes back and fingers point to the legislature or to Judge Donovan that this decision never should have been made.
Well, I mean, I guess I would ask you to think about, to saying that there's a strong likelihood that they will reoffend. I mean, I think that there is public safety issues at stake, and I do worry about them, but I do think that there are adequate and really good public safety measures that can be taken on a number of these people. If we released all of them, certainly the public would be at risk. But I think that we can manage public safety. Most states have successfully released many of their civilly committed. Minnesota is the only one that has never been able to release a single individual, and we have more per capita by many times the number of civilly committed per capita than any other state that
Haven't been able to or hasn't wanted to?
Well, I mean, who do you attribute want to? I mean, there's all kinds of people. There's the courts, there's the legislature, there's the governor, there's the attorney general, there's the county attorneys, there's the victims advocates, so it's hard to attribute want, but together we haven't been able to make it across the finish line and actually release anyone. And we need to be able to figure out how to continue to build that pipeline and figure out how, but yes, there are serious public safety concerns that do absolutely need to be balanced. But also, if you think about this, the Minnesota Sex Offender Program is a little bit of a problematic piece in that it's a false sense of security. We have 700 people there. The risks of sexual violence are much greater than the 700 worst of the worst out there on the street.
I'm going to have to wrap you up, Senator. Thank you
Great
so
discussion.
much.
Thank you,
and
Senator.
good luck as you grapple with this issue,
Yes.
because it's very complicated and it's very important, and you want to do it right.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
Wake up, you sleepy heads. Rub your eyes, get out of bed. Wake up, the wicked witch is dead.
The Wicked Witch may be dead, but these munchkins and 11 others are alive and well.
My agent called me, and I went there. To me, it was just another job. In fact, it didn't mean anything to me. I was safe about 5 or 6 years. But then when I constantly seen it every year, and I'm saying, I think they got a hit.
The Judy Garland mega hit was produced more than 50 years ago for just $2.7 million. But as this celebration emphasizes, the film had a lot going for it.
And I think what holds the whole picture together is the fact that the single greatest talent of recorded time is starring in that movie, and that's Judy.
The legendary actress would have been 68 years old this summer, but the Itasca County Historical Society has done its part in preserving her memory with nearly 1,500 pieces of memorabilia. This revolutionary Munchkin reunion is the first of several activities dedicated to a film career that will not be forgotten.
I think the fact that Judy's hometown cares enough to do this and realizes that her talent was very, very unique. There has never been, never will be anybody who has that kind of gift. This week is a celebration of that.
Indeed, this party was like being a kid in a candy store.
We represent the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild, and in the name of the Lollipop Guild, we wish to welcome you to Munchkin Land.
In Grand Rapids with photographer Sean Christie, Ryan Davenport, KDLH News.
Each year of the Minnesota biennial legislative session, state lawmakers pass laws and set budgets that impact citizens of the state. Now, it often takes years to determine what the actual outcome of some of these laws will be, though there's no shortage of opinions each year at the end of the session. So, how did Minnesotans fare this time around? Well, joining us with his view is Mike Hickey, Minnesota Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, and Dane Smith is the president of Growth and Justice, a progressive research and advocacy organization. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for being with us once again. Mike, quite a battle royal between the GOP House, the DFL Senate, and the governor. Was this sausage making at its finest?
I think it was at the end. It gets very messy with divided government, but from the business perspective, we had a really rough 2013 and 14 sessions. We're very happy to have some divided government and have some balance, but the end gets pretty ugly, and it's just hard for even people like Dane and I to find out what's going on because everything seems to become some kind of a closed door negotiation, but they're trying to get these conference committees done, and it's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Dane, we asked the question a little bit in the introduction, but do you think that Minnesotans are generally better off coming out of this session than they were going into it?
A little bit, a little bit. I think there's a lot of disappointment out there. We had almost a $2 billion projected budget surplus, a real consensus around the need for a large, expansive transportation bill. We didn't get that. There were some unnecessary cuts in healthcare and human services, but there was enough what we call equity legislation to be encouraging. Nursing home workers are going to get a big increase. That's going to be really important for a healthier middle class. And we think that there's some progress in workforce training, something business and progressives agree on. Workforce alignment, better match between people coming out of with degrees and the jobs that are in demand. And some important goal setting for post-secondary completion. Minnesota now has a goal of 70% post-secondary credentials by the year 2025.
So, Dane, should taxpayers have fared better given the size of that budget surplus?
Which taxpayers?
The average Minnesota homeowner, the guy, the business person who owns a business, the guy who's working for a living.
Well, we could have supported and did support some reasonable reductions in taxes for middle income and low income families, various credits, earned income credits, and so forth that would have continued to make our tax system more progressive or less regressive, actually. Top 1%, top 10% actually still pay a lower percentage of total state and local taxes as a percent of their income than people in the middle.
To answer your question, Dennis, yes, they could have. Yeah, there's a big disappointment for us that the House had a dramatic tax increase, and it wasn't going to happen, decrease. A dramatic one, it wasn't going to happen, but it had been nice to have something occur, and for them to walk away with about $800 million, which may grow to $1.5 billion now. By the time we redo it next year, we're going to have the same debate again. But I was a little amazed that they could not act on a tax bill. But the Senate's up this year, and the old saying is they act like the House when they're up for elections. So.
Jesse Ventura gave money back. Should we have given some monies back, write a check and say, here's some money, you overpaid?
We don't like that philosophy. A lot of people pay in more than others, and Jesse did just kind of wanted to do a kind of an automatic rebate, and there's tax reforms we really want to see done on the estate tax and trying to lower the level of commercial property taxes, and Dane's group has some priorities. I think just rebating money back is not a good way to do it.
Dane, would you have left any of that surplus money on the table?
Well, I think it's a good policy, and there's a lot of consensus around large budget reserves. We never know when the next downturn is going to occur. I think we could have invested more in education. Actually, schools did okay, 2% each per year, and of course that's where most of our public investment, most of our taxes go into schools. I think that a combination of one-time spending and a gas tax increase could have produced the leap forward the state really needs in transportation. I don't really know that it's a problem leaving money on the table. I think it's both sides, Republicans, Democrats, many interest groups preferred to have it allocated one way or the other. But next year they'll get at it again.
And transportation funding, of course, would create jobs, which could benefit some of your members, I imagine.
Yeah, we don't want the Senate's version, though. They had really a radical gas tax that put the sales tax on gas at the wholesale level. So instead of just the current gas tax is 28.5 cents. So instead of just raising it a nickel or a dime, which is the more traditional way to deal with it, they wanted to put the 6.85% sales tax on gas at the wholesale level. Immediately, we'd go up to about number 5 in gas tax rankings, and when gas goes to $4, we might have the highest. So this was really a bad proposal, and they gave up on it. Yeah. They proposed a dime in the special session, so I think they're going to go back to something that's more traditional. I don't think the House will support it, and I think in the end it's going to end up looking like a House-oriented bill with reprioritizing MnDOT spending and doing bonding, possibly some GO bonding. Right now we do trunk highway funding, but we don't do GO, general obligation bonding. But I think they're going to get off trying to put a sales tax on gas at the wholesale level. It's really a reckless proposal.
This is for both of you guys. Is Minnesota's economic health robust?
Yes, absolutely. Almost every measure, ranking after ranking, CNBC just ranked Minnesota number 1. And when Mike and I were here last year, we talked about whether the minimum wage increase and the increase in the income tax would be good or bad for business. It's not wise to put too much credence into any single ranking, and I would not do an end zone dance about the state of our economy at Mike's expense.
What do you think, Mike?
But I think that yes, our business sector is in great shape.
Well, we strongly disagree with calling Minnesota first. Obviously, there's a lot of economic stimulus going on here, and Minnesota's always been a regional center. I think we've done well despite the taxes, but this ranking did not emphasize taxes much. The ones that do rank us really low, but and those aren't necessarily balanced either, because they're looking at just taxes, and all the critical ones for entrepreneurs are really high, especially successful ones, and those are the people who really create the jobs. So no, we strongly disagree with the ranking, and they talked up our education so much, and we have this horrendous problem with achievement gap, and it's just acknowledged by everybody at the Capitol. Kids in inner city schools are not doing well. They're not getting prepared, and despite that, they raved about our education.
Mm-hmm. And Dane, your organization just released a report on inequality across the state, I understand. Right. Talk about that a little bit, because at first blush, I think it might look like Minnesota is doing pretty well in terms of a higher median income than other states and a lower unemployment rate.
Right, we are doing better than other states, but on key measures of inequality, we issued a report that showed the level of inequality in each of the 87 counties, how it's changed over time. It has gotten worse, mostly in greater Minnesota, rural counties, and in the urban core. The suburban, exurban ring, inequality is relatively low. There's relatively high affluence, kind of a homogeneous community.
In the suburbs.
In the suburbs. Mm-hmm. So the real places that are in most need of public investment, especially in human capital and infrastructure, are up here in greater Minnesota and in urban Minnesota. That was the takeaway from the report. Minnesota's inequality is getting worse, like every other state and the nation, and for that matter, the world. Global capitalism needs to figure this out, but Minnesota is doing better than most places, but we're tracking with them and getting worse.
Okay. Now, there's a report on the NFIB website that says that the best place for businesses in Minnesota right now is in those suburbs where the affluence is happening. Is that
I saw that Golden Valley. Yeah, I was a little puzzled by that too. I mean, I think any one of these analysis can be a little puzzling and very disputable. But I mean, the suburbs. There's a lot of big companies, Fortune 500 companies in the suburbs. It's easier for employees to park. Property taxes are a little lower. You do see a lot of major employers who go around suburban ring, and I think the downtown people need to keep an eye on that. And so hopefully downtown does not get cleaned out, and people just looking for cheaper property taxes, easier to park and whatnot. But then also issues of safety downtown too is really a big deal. And we really got to keep downtown safe.
Mike Hickey, Dane Smith, thank you very much. We'll have you guys back.
Great.
Okay. All right. Thank you so very much.
Thanks.
It's time now for a look at some of the week's top business stories from our friends at Business North. Michigan Street will be the designated downtown bikeway for bicyclists, city officials said Tuesday at a Superior Street reconstruction update. The bikeway issue has bounced back and forth during a 2-year discussion about how to best reconfigure downtown's main thoroughfare. At one point, the Duluth City Council cleared the way to include dedicated bike lanes on Superior Street. But further study revealed its 80-foot width is not wide enough to accommodate all the competing uses. On-street motor vehicle parking will be eliminated on Michigan Street, so it will be safer for bicyclists.
Opponents on Tuesday expressed concerns about a proposed concentrated animal feeding operation that could establish an industrial hog farm in Bayfield County. The location would be 8 miles upstream from Chequamegon Bay near Ashland. At a conference call to area media, Mary Doherty, co-founder of the Farms Not Factories group, said the Wisconsin DNR lacks the staff and funding to monitor pollution the operation could bring to the county. In February, the Bayfield County Board imposed a 12-month moratorium until the concept receives further study.
A Minnesota tax court judge has lowered land valuations for Blandin Paper Company. While the decision was applauded by paper company executives, public officials say it could reduce the tax base in Itasca, St. Louis, Aiken, and Coochin counties. That could transfer more tax burden to other property owners, according to those officials. It's not the result municipal executives were hoping for, according to St. Louis County Attorney Mark Rubin. Rubin said the 4 counties are in the process of evaluating their appeal options. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Well, if you have a comment on this week's show, call now, dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message, or send an email to almanacnorth@wdsc.org. You can also go to the WDSC website for updates on your favorite PBS programs, learn about events at the station, and watch episodes of your favorite local programs. Well, Julie, plenty of events are going on around the region this weekend, and hopefully throughout the whole weekend, some good weather to enjoy them.
I'm hoping so, because I'm hoping to go down to Rhubarb Festival and the Park Point Art Fair and check things out.
All right, thank you so very much. All right, for Julie and the crew at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend. Good night, everybody, and be kind.